I still remember the morning when everything changed. It was quiet, colder than usual, and the sun hadn't fully risen yet. The streets looked empty, the way they do when life feels heavy on your shoulders. I walked the same path I always did, holding the same warm cup of tea in my hand, ready to start another long day at work. But that morning, something inside me felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the wind moved through the trees, like it wanted to say something I had ignored for too long. Friends, before we dive into this story, I want to ask for a small favor. If what you hear resonates with your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how vast our community is. Happy listening. For almost a year, I had seen her sitting near the bus stop every day, an old lady in a faded brown shawl. She never asked for anything, never spoke, never complained. She simply sat there with her small metal cup beside her. Sometimes she looked at the ground. Sometimes she looked at the people walking past her. And sometimes she looked up at the sky as if she were waiting for someone who never arrived. I don't know when it became a routine for me. Maybe the first day I dropped a few coins in her cup, I told myself it was nothing. Just a small gesture. But then the next day, I did it again. And then again. Before I even realized it, giving her some change became part of my morning, the same way tying my shoelaces or locking the front door did. It felt right. It felt like something I should do. Not because she looked poor or helpless. Not because I wanted to feel good about myself. But because there was something in her eyes, something quiet and tired that made me feel connected to her in a way I couldn't explain. Even though she never spoke, she always nodded slightly when I dropped the coins into her cup. It was a small nod, almost invisible, but enough for me to know she noticed. Enough for me to know she appreciated it. In a strange way, that silent exchange became comforting. On days when work was difficult, or when life felt too heavy, that small nod felt like a reminder that kindness still mattered. But that morning, the morning everything changed, she didn't just nod. I remember walking toward her, hearing the soft clinking sound as I placed the coins into her cup. I was already turning away when I felt something unexpected, a weak, trembling hand gently wrapping around my wrist. I froze. She had never touched me before. She had never even tried to stop me. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I turned slowly and saw her looking up at me, her eyes clearer and more focused than I had ever seen them. There was something urgent in them. Something that made me feel as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Her grip was weak, but steady. I felt the weight of it, not physical weight, but an emotional one. Like she was trying to hold on to more than just my hand. And then she spoke. Her voice was thin, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. I had to lean closer to hear her. The world around us felt completely still, as if everything, the morning traffic, the passing footsteps, even the breathing of the city had paused to listen. She said, "I need to tell you something. Something you should have heard long ago." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. At least, I thought she didn't. But the way she said those words, slow, careful, filled with a strange kind of sadness, made me feel as if she knew exactly who I was. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she gently squeezed my hand again, stopping me. Her eyes softened, and in them, I saw something I had never seen before: recognition. Not the kind of recognition you have when you see a familiar stranger every day. No. This was deeper. Personal. Like she knew my story. Like she had been carrying something inside her that had to do with me. Something she could no longer keep hidden. Before I could speak, she whispered again, her voice shaking just slightly. "My child. I need to tell you the truth." Those words felt like they shattered the quiet morning air around us. I didn't know why she called me my child. I didn't know why her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what truth she meant. All I knew was that in that moment, standing there on a cold street, holding the trembling hand of a woman I thought was a stranger, my life changed in a way I never expected. And deep inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. curiosity, and a quiet ache I didn't yet understand. For a moment after she called me my child, I just stood there, unable to move or understand what was happening. The street seemed colder. The wind felt sharper. My breath felt heavier in my chest. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but my voice didn't come out. It was as if something inside me had suddenly forgotten how to speak. She slowly let go of my hand and lowered hers back into her lap. Her fingers trembled as she tried to adjust her shawl. I noticed her hands more closely this time, thin, almost transparent with age. The veins showed clearly, and the knuckles were bruised as if she had been carrying something heavy for too long. I stepped closer and knelt down slightly so I could see her face better. There were deep lines around her eyes, lines that told me she must have cried many times. Her lips were pale, and when she breathed, it sounded like it took effort. She looked fragile, like if a strong wind passed by, it might carry her away. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. She looked at me for a long time before answering. It wasn't the kind of look you give to a stranger. It was softer, deeper, filled with something I couldn't name. Then, in a voice that trembled like a thin thread, she said, "Not here, not like this. Sit with me tomorrow, please." I nodded before I even thought about it. There was something in her eyes, something quiet and painful that made me want to stay, but she slowly raised her hand, signaling for me to go. "Tomorrow," she whispered again. I didn't want to leave her alone, especially after she said something so heavy, but there was something in her expression that told me she had said as much as she could for that moment. So I walked away, though every step felt heavier than the last. The rest of my day felt strange. My mind kept returning to her words. My child. Did she mistake me for someone else? Did she mean it in a symbolic way? Did she simply say it because she was lonely? But her eyes didn't look confused. They looked like they knew. The whole day at work, I struggled to focus. The sound of keyboards, the ringing phones, the quiet conversations around me, none of it felt real. It all faded behind her trembling voice. When I came home that evening, I felt unusually quiet. My house was small but warm, with soft yellow lights and the smell of tea still lingering in the air. I sat down on the couch and stared at the same spot on the wall for a long time, trying to understand why her words stayed with me the way they did. Maybe it was because I didn't know much about my own past. My childhood had many empty spaces, chapters that felt unclear or stories that were never really explained to me. My mother never spoke much about the early years. She only said, "It was a difficult time," and changed the subject. As a child, I didn't think much of it. But as I grew older, the silence around my past felt heavier. There were no baby pictures of me. No early birthday photos. No stories of the day I was born. No funny memories of my first words or first steps. Whenever I asked about it, my mother gently avoided the details. "Those things don't matter," she would say. "What matters is that we have each other." And I believed her. Or at least I tried to. But now, after hearing that old lady's whisper, something in my heart stirred, something I had kept quiet for years. A small, hidden part of me had always wondered if there was something my family never told me. That night I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept imagining her tired eyes and the way her voice shook. I replayed her words over and over. I wondered if she would even be there the next morning. What if she didn't show up? What if something happened to her? What if that moment had been my only chance to understand a truth I never knew I needed? I woke up earlier than usual the next day. I dressed quickly, barely tasting the tea I drank. My heart beat faster with each step toward the bus stop. When I reached the corner, I saw her from a distance. She was sitting in her usual place, wrapped in her brown shawl, her hands resting on her lap. She looked tired, but she was there waiting. I walked toward her slowly, almost afraid that if I moved too fast, the moment would disappear. She looked up when I approached, and for the first time since I had known her, she offered me a tiny smile. It was faint, but it was real. "Sit," she said gently, patting the spot next to her. I sat down, feeling strangely nervous. The morning was quiet, the sky still painted with soft pink light. Cars passed occasionally, but the world around us felt hushed. "I have seen you grow," she began, her voice calm but heavy. "Not with my eyes, but in the way your kindness has stayed the same." I didn't understand what she meant. I opened my mouth to ask, but she raised her hand slightly. "You remind me of someone," she continued. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Her words felt heavy, filled with memories I couldn't see. "I lost my child," she said quietly. "Many years ago." I felt my breath pause. "I searched for her everywhere," she went on. "Every street, every home, every place that felt familiar. But she was gone. Taken from me before I could hold her long enough." Her voice broke slightly, and she closed her eyes. I felt a strange tightness in my chest, as if her pain was something I had carried unknowingly all these years. "I was young," she whispered. "I had no power. I had no family to stand with me. And when they took her away, they told me I would never see her again." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with tiny tears. "But when you walk," she said softly, "you walk like she did. When you smile politely, you smile like she used to. Even the way you tie your scarf. It is the same." My heart raced. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. A part of me wanted to tell her she must be mistaken. But another part of me, the quiet part, the part that never had answers, felt something else. Something that scared me. Something that felt like truth. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on top of mine. Her skin was cold, but her touch felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. "I don't want you to think I am claiming something that isn't real," she said gently. "I just wanted to tell you that you remind me of the child I lost. And sometimes, when you drop those coins into my cup, I feel like the world is giving me one more chance to feel close to her." Her confession was soft, but it shook something deep inside me. I thought of my missing childhood photographs. The silent answers. The things my mother never talked about. For the first time in my life, I wondered if the silence in my past wasn't just painful, but meaningful. The old lady withdrew her hand slowly, as if she didn't want to seem demanding. "I am not saying you are her," she whispered. "I just needed to say what my heart carried for years." But I didn't pull my hand away. I let her hold it for a moment longer, because something in me didn't want the connection to end. A breeze moved past us. Leaves rustled. The world felt somehow softer around us. And that's when she told me her name. "My name is Sophia," she said quietly. "It means purity. But life, it wasn't pure with me. It was cruel." I repeated her name gently. "Sophia." She smiled weakly. It has been a long time since someone said it with kindness. I didn't know what the truth was yet. I didn't know what answers lay hidden in the years before my memory began. All I knew was that this old woman, this stranger, this fragile soul had opened a door inside me that had never been opened before. And I felt myself stepping through it, not knowing where it would lead. I sat with Sophia for what felt like a long time that morning, listening to her speak in her gentle, trembling voice. After she finished telling me about her lost child, she fell quiet. She looked down at her hands, twisting the corner of her shawl between her fingers. I could tell she wasn't sure if she had said too much or if she had scared me away. But strangely, I didn't feel scared. I felt unsettled, yes. Confused. Pulled in two directions. But I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to walk away from her. Something inside me insisted that I stay a little longer, that I let her finish what she had been holding in her heart. Yet time wasn't on our side. My bus came. I stood reluctantly, promising I would return after work. "Only if you feel comfortable," she said softly. But she didn't know comfort had nothing to do with it. Curiosity, confusion, and a quiet ache had already settled inside me. I walked away feeling like I had opened a book I couldn't close anymore. The entire day was heavy. My thoughts were crowded, tangled, refusing to settle. I kept remembering little pieces of Sophia Saus, Bikesiauda.com. Face, the tired lines on her forehead, the sadness in her smile, the way she said my walk reminded her of the child she lost. Work felt distant and mechanical. People talked around me. Papers piled up on my desk. Phones rang. But none of it felt important, not compared to the weight of her words. And then there was the other weight. The weight I had carried for years without naming. The missing photographs. The stories that never existed. The silence around my early years. At lunch, I called my mother, something I rarely did in the middle of the day. When she answered, her voice sounded surprised. "Are you all right?" she asked. "You never call at this hour." "I'm fine," I replied. I wanted to ask you something." I didn't understand why that simple gesture affected me so much. But it did. It reminded me of something. A blurred memory. A soft hand. A quiet lap. A gentle presence. From a time when I was small and still believed the world was simple. I felt a warmth behind my eyes. Not tears. Not yet. Just the beginning of them. "She used to sit like that," I whispered, surprising myself again. The old lady tilted her head slightly, listening without a word. "She was quiet," I continued, the words forming slowly, carefully, as if they were being lifted out of me by someone else. "She didn't talk much. But when she looked at me, I felt like she saw everything. Even the things I didn't say." Another breath. Soft. Uneven. I haven't felt that in a long time. The sentence came out small, trembling. The old lady blinked once, slowly. Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. Her breath deepened. Not dramatically. Not symbolically. Just naturally, like she, too, understood the weight of what I had said. I didn't know why I felt safe telling her. I didn't know why this stranger's presence made something inside me loosen. I didn't know why my voice sounded like it belonged to a younger version of me. But I knew one thing with quiet certainty. Something inside me was opening. Something that had been closed for far too long. I felt myself wanting to say more. To tell her about the distance in my family. The silence in my home. The ache of missing someone who wasn't coming back. But before I could continue, I felt myself slipping too far, too fast. I closed my mouth gently. The old lady didn't look disappointed. She didn't push me to continue. She didn't even seem surprised that my words had come to an abrupt stop. She simply watched me with that same soft understanding. The kind that says, "I'm here. You don't have to explain everything today." And somehow, that made me breathe easier. The slip had happened. The truth had begun to surface. And she had caught it with the quietest grace I had ever seen. For a while, neither of us said anything. The world moved around us, cars in the distance, footsteps brushing past on the pavement, a faint conversation from two people crossing the street, but none of it touched the space between us. It felt like someone had gently placed a thin, invisible curtain around the two of us, letting only quiet pass through. I stood there with the soft ache of my words still hanging in the air. My mother used to look at me like that. The sentence echoed inside me, gentle but steady, reminding me that it was real. That I had said it. That I had allowed a stranger to touch a part of me I usually kept hidden. The old lady didn't move much. She didn't react in a way that suggested surprise or pity. She simply continued looking at me, her gaze deep but kind, like someone listening with more than just their ears. There was no pressure. No expectation. No rush. Just presence. Her presence felt like a soft blanket laid over a trembling heart, warm, grounding, and quiet. I let out a slow breath, almost unnoticed. My shoulders relaxed a little, though I hadn't realized they were tense. It felt as if I had been holding something heavy for so long that I forgot it wasn't normal. Until someone reminded me that I could put it down, even if just for a moment. I looked at her hands again, those aged, steady fingers resting gently in her lap. Something about them felt reassuring. They didn't look fragile, even though age had marked them. They looked capable, familiar, safe. A small part of me wondered why everything about her felt so familiar lately. Was it just my emotions playing tricks on me? Was it the loneliness inside me echoing back at her silence? Or was it something else, something deeper, something I hadn't allowed myself to consider? I didn't know. But I knew this. The moment didn't feel random. It didn't feel like two strangers standing in the morning light. It felt connected. Unexpectedly connected. She blinked slowly, and when her eyes opened again, she gave the faintest smile. It wasn't wide. It wasn't bright. It was soft, almost like a memory returning. A smile full of something unspoken. For the first time, I felt a gentle urge to cry, not because I was sad, but because her kindness was touching something old and tender inside me. Something I had pressed down for years. I swallowed again. My voice felt small, but steady enough. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't know exactly what I was thanking her for. For listening. For understanding without words. For standing still with me in a moment I didn't know I needed. For reminding me of a warmth I had forgotten. Maybe all of it. Maybe more. She didn't reply. Not at first. Instead, she lifted her gaze slightly and studied my face with the attention of someone who sees more than what's on the surface. Her eyes moved gently over my forehead, my expression, the corners of my eyes, as if reading a story that I did not have the courage to speak aloud. And then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she spoke. Only a few words. Simple words. Gentle words. But they pierced through the quiet space between us and settled inside me like they belonged there. "You look tired today, dear." That was it. Just that. Not dramatic. Not revealing. Not extraordinary. But those words, they touched something deep inside me. No one had said that to me in a long time. No one had looked at me closely enough to notice. No one had cared enough to speak it. Not in my home. Not in my family. Not in the places I moved through every day. But she saw it. She saw me. Not the version of me that smiled politely. Not the version that acted strong. Not the version that hid everything. She saw the tired part. The worn part. The quiet ache beneath the surface. And she didn't ask why. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask what I was carrying. She simply acknowledged it. Softly. Warmly. Truthfully. It made something inside me tremble, something delicate, something that had been untouched for years. I opened my mouth, not sure what I would say, but the words didn't come. My throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't painful. It was more like a deep breath trying to reach a place that had been closed off. I nodded instead. A small, almost invisible nod. Her eyes softened even more, and for a moment, it felt like she wanted to say something else, just a hint of movement in her expression, something thoughtful, something tender. But she didn't speak further. She let the moment be. She let the quiet settle again. She let my heart process her simple truth. "You look tired today, dear." The words replayed in my mind, gentle and warm. And unexpectedly, a single tear formed behind my eyes. Not enough to fall. Not enough to be seen. Just enough to let me know that something inside me had shifted. The morning felt different now. More real. More honest. More connected. This wasn't the big reveal. This wasn't the moment the truth would come out. This wasn't the moment the story turned sharply. No. This was the moment it softened. The moment a stranger's voice touched a wound I had learned to ignore. The moment something inside me finally began to move. The morning after the truth came out felt strangely calm. Not peaceful. Just calm, in the way a house feels when the storm has passed but the trees are still dripping with rainwater. A question without words. A gentle nudge. An invitation to let myself be more real than I planned to be. I looked down for a moment. My fingers were still slightly curled from when they touched hers. I didn't understand why it affected me so much. I didn't understand why one simple moment had shaken something inside me that I thought was steady. When I lifted my eyes again, she was still watching me. But it wasn't heavy. Her gaze felt warm, patient, and strangely familiar, like someone who had once held me when I was small and frightened, even though I knew that wasn't possible. "Are you okay?" She didn't say it out loud, but her eyes did. And that silent question, it reached deeper than I expected. I felt something shift again, like a small crack forming in a place I thought was solid. Not a painful crack, but the kind that lets light in. The kind that tells you maybe something inside you needs to be seen, needs to breathe. I tried to smile again, because that's what we do when we don't know how to answer emotions honestly. We smile. We pretend. We hide. But the smile I gave her this time was weaker than the first. It wasn't convincing, not even to myself. She noticed. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, the gentlest lift, as if acknowledging something without confronting it. She didn't ask anything. She didn't speak. She didn't reach out. She just stayed present. And that presence alone was louder than any words she could have spoken. For a moment, I felt the urge to sit beside her. I don't know why. I had never done that before. I had always been the passerby, the person who gave a little and left. I had never considered lingering, never imagined becoming part of her morning instead of just someone moving through it. But today, the idea of sitting, of just being still near her, felt strangely comforting. I didn't sit though. I stayed standing, caught in the strange trembling space between wanting to walk away and wanting to stay forever. She blinked slowly, and when her eyes opened again, there was something different in them, not sadness, not worry, but a kind of recognition. Not that she recognized me exactly, but something inside me. As though she had known this type of heaviness before. As though she had carried it herself once. As though she understood what it meant to feel something without having the words for it. Her hand moved slightly on her lap, not toward me, not asking for anything, just adjusting her shawl. But the grace in that movement felt strangely reassuring, like watching someone tend to something fragile without fear. Her presence steadied me in a way I wasn't ready to admit. I cleared my throat softly, though I wasn't sure why. There was nothing caught there. It was just my body trying to make space for whatever emotion was rising inside me. The air felt different now. Not heavy. Not light. Just meaningful. As though this moment mattered more than it should. I wondered if she could hear my breathing, slow and uneven. I wondered if she noticed the way my shoulders sank just slightly, like a tired truth had finally unclenched inside me. She didn't speak. But she didn't look away either. She simply held that quiet connection between us, giving me all the time I needed to exist in whatever state I was in. And somehow, that was enough. More than enough. It was comforting in a way that surprised me. Almost like she had done this before. For someone else. Maybe for many people. Or maybe just for one person she had loved very deeply. A small gust of wind brushed past us, lifting the edge of her scarf. She held it down with her wrinkled fingers, and for a moment, I noticed how steady her hands were. Steadier than mine. I felt something tighten in my chest again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was a kind of warmth I didn't expect, a quiet gratitude for her noticing something I hadn't said. And then, softly, without saying a single word, she gave me the kind of look that people give when they see through your silence. I wasn't prepared for it. I wasn't ready for how much it touched me, or how much it made me want to speak. But the unraveling had only just begun. There is a moment quiet, unplanned, when emotion stops asking for permission. It simply rises. It simply appears. It simply slips out. I didn't mean to say anything that morning. I didn't walk toward her with the intention of sharing anything personal. I didn't plan to let any part of my inner world show. But something about her silence. Something about the way she kept looking at me with gentle patience. Something about the way her presence softened the edges of my thoughts. It opened a small door inside me. And once it opened even slightly, the truth I had been carrying for years began to push through. I stood there longer than I should have. People kept passing by, but I barely noticed them. My breathing felt slow, careful. My heartbeat felt soft and uneven. My thoughts felt fragile, as if one wrong movement could make them spill all over the ground. She was still watching me in that quiet, steady way, expecting nothing, asking nothing, offering nothing except the safety of her presence. And that safety, it was too much. Too warm. Too familiar. Too close to something I had lost. Without warning, my throat tightened. It was sudden, sharp, like a string pulling from deep inside my chest. I swallowed, but the emotion didn't move. It stayed there, pressing upward, demanding to be felt. I tried to look away, to break the connection, but even that small movement felt heavy. She noticed. Her eyes softened even more, just a slight softening, barely visible, but it was enough to tell me she saw the shift inside me. She wasn't confused by it. She wasn't alarmed. She wasn't impatient. She simply held space for it. And somehow, that made the ache worse. I opened my mouth to say something simple, something neutral, maybe, thank you, or have a good day, but the words didn't go where I expected them to. What came out instead was something much smaller, much more fragile. Something I hadn't said in years. My mother used to look at me like that. The words escaped before I understood them. I heard myself say them. But it felt like someone else had spoken. Like the sentence had been sitting silently inside me for years, waiting for the right moment and the right person to slip out. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't react with surprise. She just breathed gently, as if making room for what I had said. I swallowed again, the sound quiet but loud in my ears. My eyes lowered, not in shame but in a strange, heavy vulnerability. I hadn't talked about my mother in a long time, not in any real way. I hadn't allowed myself to. It hurt too deeply. It opened too many doors inside me that I didn't want to face. But now here I was, standing before a woman I barely knew, speaking words I didn't intend to share. I felt exposed, not in a frightening way, but in the way you feel when someone unexpectedly finds the truth you've been hiding. I let out a soft breath. I don't know why I said that, I added, barely above a whisper. The morning felt quieter now. Even the distant hum of the city seemed softer, like everything around us had leaned in to listen. For a few seconds, she didn't move at all. She just absorbed my words, held them gently, without judgment. Then she did something almost invisible. Something so small most people wouldn't have noticed. She slowly placed her hands together in her lap, interlocking her fingers. Not tightly, not anxiously, just calmly, as if preparing herself to hold more of the moment. I tried to ignore these thoughts, but they followed me everywhere, at work, at home, even in my dreams. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, a memory drifted into my mind. A faint one. A blurry one. I didn't know if it was real or imagined. A woman humming softly. A warm chest. A soft shawl with a floral pattern. A gentle rocking motion. I tried to hold on to the memory, but it slipped away like mist. Was it Sophia? Or was it nothing more than my mind trying to connect dots that didn't belong together? I didn't know. But the conflict inside me, the quiet, emotional, growing conflict, was becoming impossible to ignore. I did not sleep well the night before. It wasn't because something loud happened. It wasn't because I had a nightmare. It was simply because my mind would not stop moving. That blurry moment with the old lady. The way she looked at me. The way her eyes held something I couldn't describe. And the way I felt something strange inside me, something I could not name. It followed me into the morning. I woke up feeling heavier than usual, like someone had quietly placed a blanket of emotion on my chest while I slept. Even the sunlight stretching through my curtains felt dimmer, softer, as if it didn't want to disturb whatever was happening inside me. I kept asking myself questions that had no answers. Why did I feel that way? Why did her eyes remind me of someone? Why does her silence feel louder than words? I tried brushing it off. I drank tea. I sat by the window. I took longer than usual to tie my shoes. But my thoughts didn't leave me. They pressed themselves against me gently, not aggressively, like soft hands tapping my shoulder again and again, reminding me they were still there. By the time I stepped outside, I felt fragile. Not broken. Not hurt. Not angry. Just fragile, like the kind of glass that looks strong, but if you tap it in just the right spot, it might crack quietly. As I walked my usual path toward the place where the old lady always sat, I felt something unusual. Nervousness. A soft, quiet kind of nervousness. I didn't know why. I had seen her so many times. I had given her change every morning. I had greeted her with the same small smile, the same gentle nod. Nothing had changed. And yet, something inside me had. Each step felt heavier. Each breath felt deeper. Each corner I turned made my heart squeeze a little more. I didn't understand myself. Why was I so affected by one unclear moment? Why did an old woman's quiet stare make me feel like I was losing something I had never found? Why did the blurry memory of her eyes refuse to leave my mind? I felt as if I was carrying a story that I didn't know yet, but somehow, it was already weighing on me. When I reached the street where she usually sat, I slowed down without meaning to. My footsteps echoed softer against the pavement. There were people around, but everything felt muted. Even the morning traffic, the horns, the faint hum of conversations felt distant. My eyes searched for her automatically. And when I saw her, my heart did something strange. It tightened, then softened, then tightened again. She was sitting in her usual spot. Same clothing, same stillness, same quiet presence. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was in the way she held her hands. Maybe it was the way her shoulders rose and fell with slow breaths. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe everything only looked different because I was different today. I paused for a moment a few steps away from her, pretending to adjust my bag. I needed that pause. I needed to steady myself. I needed to understand why my chest felt warm and heavy at the same time. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe a few seconds. Maybe longer. But when I finally walked toward her, I felt a softness settling in my throat, a gentle ache that made me swallow carefully. She lifted her eyes when she sensed me near. Slowly. Deliberately. As if she already knew I had been standing there longer than usual. Her gaze met mine, and everything inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't even a discovery. It was just a quiet movement, like a curtain blowing gently because someone opened a window in another room. I felt exposed, not in a vulnerable way, but in a way that made me aware of parts of myself that I often ignored. I smiled at her. Or at least I tried to. It came out different. Not the usual polite smile I gave her every day. This one felt weak, shaky, almost apologetic. She noticed. I could tell. Her eyes softened even more, if that was even possible, and a calmness settled over her face. Not worry, not shock, not confusion. Just calmness. Quiet understanding. The kind that doesn't ask questions. The kind that simply exists. I reached into my pocket and took out the change, like I did every morning, but my hand felt slower. My fingers trembled just a little, not enough for the world to notice, but enough for me to feel it. And maybe enough for her to notice too. When I placed the coins in her hand, my fingers brushed against her skin by accident. It felt warm, familiar, comforting, and somehow, unbearably sad. I didn't know why. Not yet. But something inside me reacted to that touch, as if a quiet truth was tapping from behind a closed door inside my chest. I pulled my hand back gently, but my stomach had already tightened. My breath grew shallow for a second. I felt tears I didn't understand forming somewhere far behind my eyes. I didn't cry, but the feeling was there. Like a soft pressure. Like something waiting. She looked at me for a long second, or maybe it was 2 or 3 before she nodded once. A slow, thoughtful nod. A nod that made my throat tighten even more. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell her something. I wanted to ask her why she felt familiar. I wanted to ask myself why I suddenly felt like a child again, standing before someone who held a part of my story. But no words came. Only silence. A heavy, gentle silence. One that wrapped around both of us. And in that silence, my emotional unraveling had quietly begun. I don't know if she sensed it immediately, or if she had been sensing it for longer than I realized, but the moment I tried to step back just a small step, just enough to let the morning return to its normal rhythm, she looked at me in a way that made me stop moving entirely. It wasn't a dramatic stare. It wasn't sharp or questioning. It wasn't even concerned in the way people usually look concerned. It was soft, deep, as if she could see something behind my eyes that I didn't know how to hide. And strangely, I didn't want to hide it. I stood there, longer than I usually did, holding on to nothing but the quiet weight in my chest. She didn't blink much. She just kept observing me with that calm silence that made everything else fade away. People walked past us. Cars rushed by. The world moved as usual. But in that tiny space between us, time slowed. It changed shape. It almost felt like the morning was holding its breath with me. She tilted her head slightly, the smallest movement, but it felt like an entire conversation. There was a pause. A careful silence. Yes. I almost asked her right then about my childhood, why there were no pictures, no clear memories, no stories. But the words stuck in my throat. Something inside me whispered that it wasn't the right time. I didn't know enough yet. I didn't know what questions to ask or how to ask them without sounding suspicious. So I said something else. I just wanted to hear your voice. She laughed softly, relieved. I'm always here. You know that. But for the first time, I wasn't sure. When I hung up, guilt rushed through me. I wasn't used to hiding things from my mother. She had always been my place of safety. But now something new was happening, something uncertain, and I didn't want to bring her into it until I understood more. After work, I hurried back to the bus stop. Sophia was still there. She looked colder than she had in the morning. Her shawl couldn't fight the evening wind, and her hands were folded tightly, as if she were trying to keep warm. When she saw me approaching, she straightened slightly, a faint relief crossing her face as if she had been afraid I wouldn't return. You came back, she said. Of course, I replied, sitting beside her. For a moment we didn't speak. The streetlights flickered on, casting a soft orange glow around us. The world felt quieter at that hour. Can I ask you something? I said finally. She nodded. When you lost your child, how old was she? Sophia took a slow breath. Only a few months old. They told me they were taking her somewhere safer. They said I was too young to care for her. I begged, but they didn't listen. And when they took her, they didn't even let me touch her. They just said she would have a better life. A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. I waited for years, she whispered. I searched. I prayed. I tried to ask where she was taken. But every door closed in my face. Her voice broke. I don't know what she looks like now. I don't know if she is alive. I don't know if she grew up happy. I don't know anything. I felt my throat tighten. There was something painfully familiar in her story. A childhood lost. A truth buried. A silence no one explained. Why are you alone now? I asked gently. She looked down at her hands. Life was unkind. I had no family left. No home of my own. Some mistakes were mine. Some were not. But loneliness became the only thing that stayed. She paused, then looked at me slowly. Until you started coming by. Her words felt like a small stone dropped into a still pond. Over the next several days, I kept returning to her. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. Each time I sat with her, she shared a little more of her past. Not all at once. Her stories came in small pieces, scattered like fragile memories she was afraid to touch. I learned that she once worked in a small sewing shop. That she once loved reading old poetry, though she hadn't held a book in years. That she used to hum lullabies to calm herself when life felt too hard. Sometimes she shared stories of joy. Sometimes she shared stories of pain. Sometimes she said nothing at all and simply looked up at the sky. But every day, something inside me softened more and more. I found myself thinking of her during quiet moments, wondering if she was warm enough, if she had eaten, if she felt lonely when I wasn't there. I began bringing her hot tea, and she always held the cup carefully, like it was something precious. One evening, I brought her a small blanket from my home. She hesitated at first, then accepted it with tears in her eyes. "You shouldn't do this," she whispered. "Why not?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because kindness like yours, it reminds me too much of what I lost. And I don't want to hold on to something I can't keep." Her words hurt more than I expected. "You don't have to keep anything," I said quietly. "Just let me sit with you." She nodded, her lips trembling. But as my connection with Sophia grew, something else began to change inside me, something I tried to ignore at first. Questions, doubts, memories I never had. I found myself studying my own features in the mirror, wondering if anything about me looked out of place: my eyes, my cheekbones, the shape of my hands. I felt silly doing it, but I couldn't stop. Sometimes I found myself remembering small things my mother said in the past, things that felt harmless at the time but now carried a different weight. It was a difficult time. You came into my life like a blessing I didn't expect. Some stories are better left in the past. Were these things normal? Were they supposed to feel suspicious? Or was I letting my imagination run wild? For days, I told myself I was overthinking. That Sophia simply missed her daughter. That she saw pieces of her in me because she needed comfort, not because there was a real connection. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. One morning, I left home earlier than usual. I reached the bus stop, expecting to find Sophia sitting in her usual place. But she wasn't there. Her small metal cup was gone. The blanket I gave her was gone. The spot where she sat looked cold and empty. For a moment, fear rushed through me. Was she all right? Was she sick? Did someone hurt her? Did something happen during the night? I waited for almost half an hour, feeling more anxious with every passing minute. I didn't know where she stayed, where she slept, or who she turned to when she needed help. She never told me, and I never asked. Now I regretted that. Just when I began losing hope, I saw her walking slowly from the direction of the small side street behind the bus stop. But she wasn't walking the way she usually did. She was limping. Her shawl was torn on one side. Her hands were shaking. Her face looked pale, paler than I had ever seen it. I rushed toward her. "Sophia, what happened? Are you all right?" She looked startled when she saw me, then relieved. But she shook her head gently. "I'm fine," she whispered. But she wasn't. I could see it. "Please sit," I said, guiding her to the usual spot. She lowered herself with difficulty, wincing as she bent her knee. "Did someone hurt you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Tell me the truth," I said softly. Her eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes, people forget that I am human." My heart broke at her words. She took a shaky breath. "Last night, a group of boys, they pushed me. They said I was dirty. They said I should move away from the shelter entrance. I fell. But it's nothing. I am used to it. Used to it." Those words hit me like a blow. I felt a deep ache inside my chest, a protective ache I had never felt for anyone outside my own family. "No one should be used to that," I said quietly. "No one." She closed her eyes, the tears slipping down her cheeks. "But you're here now," she whispered. "And that is enough." From that day, my feelings grew even more complicated. I didn't just care about Sophia. I worried about her. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to understand her pain. And I wanted to know why being around her felt like being close to something important, something that belonged to me in a way I couldn't describe. But at the same time, a quiet fear began to grow. What if she was right? What if my past wasn't what I thought? What if there was a truth hidden beneath the silence of my childhood? I woke up earlier than usual. My eyes opened before the alarm, before the sun had fully risen, before the world had warmed enough to push the night away. For a moment, I lay completely still. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what to feel. The night before had changed something inside me, something I wasn't ready to face all at once. Sophia's words, her truth, her past, her pain, it all came back to me in layers. Every detail she had shared echoed in my mind with a softness that somehow felt heavier than anger. I kept hearing her voice, trembling but honest. "I never wanted you to know me this way, but I wanted you to know me before I die." I didn't know why that line was the one that stayed with me. Maybe because it was the line that held everything. Loss, regret, hope, and a strange kind of goodbye. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my hands resting on my knees. The world outside was quiet. No traffic yet. No birds. No footsteps in the hallway. Just silence, like the universe was giving me time to understand what had happened. And then, softly, the thought came. I need to see her again. Not because I owed her anything. Not because of guilt. Not even out of obligation. I needed to see her. Because something in me was shifting. It was slow, gentle, almost fragile, but it was real. And sometimes, that is enough to get a person moving. I reached the street corner earlier than usual. Earlier than I'd ever been there before. The city was still waking up. The shops were closed, the air cool, the sky a shade of soft gray that comes just before dawn fully arrives. For the first time ever, I wasn't looking at the ground. I wasn't walking fast. I wasn't trying to get through the morning like a task. I was searching. Searching for a small shape. A familiar scarf. A hunched figure. A presence that now felt strangely important. But the corner was empty. No cart. No blankets. No old newspaper she used to sit on. Just pavement. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. Maybe she was running late. Maybe she didn't feel well. Maybe the night had been too cold. Maybe. My chest tightened. I tried to breathe slowly, the way the nurse had once taught me years ago when I'd struggled with panic. But the air felt heavier, more solid. I walked a little further down the street, peeking into alleyways. Maybe she had moved. Maybe she had found a different spot. Maybe. I stopped walking. Because deep down, I already knew. Her words from the night before. They were not poetic. Not exaggerated. Not dramatic. They were literal. I do not have many days left. I felt something fragile inside my chest begin to crack. I turned back toward the corner and stood there again, my hands deep in my pockets, my breath unsteady. I felt foolish. I felt helpless. I felt late. For years. I had passed her without seeing her. Without wondering. Without caring. Now that I wanted to see her, needed to see her, she was gone. Life has a way of doing that. It waits until we open our eyes. And then it tests whether we're ready to face what we missed. I didn't go to work that morning. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I just walked. Slowly at first, then with more purpose, then with a quiet desperation I didn't show on my face. I checked every street she might have walked through. Every bench. Every shelter entrance. Every alleyway where shadows looked like tired people resting. No one had seen her. Some people recognized her when I described her. The one with the blue scarf. Yes, she walks slow. Always alone. She doesn't talk much, does she? I wanted to say. No. She talks beautifully. More beautifully than most of us ever will. But they didn't know that. Because they hadn't listened. Because I hadn't listened either. Not until the very end. I retraced her steps the way I'd imagined them from the stories she shared. Her childhood memories. Her family. Her losses. Her journeys. Her quiet resilience. And then I reached a place I had never visited before. A small public park. Something about it felt familiar, not because I had been there, but because she had described it in one of her stories. This is where I rest on warm days, she had said. So I searched the park carefully. And there, near a bench under a leafless tree, I saw her scarf. Folded. Neat. Placed deliberately on the wooden seat. My breath caught. I walked toward it slowly, almost afraid to touch it. It felt wrong to disturb something so gentle, so intentional. Next to the scarf, there was a small envelope with my name written in trembling handwriting. My knees softened. The world around me blurred. For a moment, I just stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to decide whether opening the envelope would break me, or finally let me understand. After a long pause, I sat on the bench. The same bench she must have sat on hours before. The same cold wood her tired body had leaned against. I picked up the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was short. Shorter than her stories. Shorter than her life. Shorter than all the things she never told me. But it held more weight than anything I'd ever read. It began simply, "My daughter." And I froze. Because she had never called me that before. Not once. Not even when she asked if my mother was alive. Not even when she looked at me with a softness I didn't understand. Not even when she held my hand and told me she had something to say. I took a deep breath and continued reading. My daughter. You do not know me, but I have known you for many years. Not as a mother knows a child, but as someone who watches goodness from a distance. Every coin you gave me, no matter how small, felt like a reminder that kindness still lives in this world. I wanted to tell you who I was. I wanted to tell you everything. But life did not give me the courage to speak sooner. I blinked quickly, but my vision kept blurring. My throat tightened. I pressed the letter to my chest for a moment, holding it there as if doing so would somehow steady the pieces inside me. Then I continued. You remind me of someone I once lost. Someone young, gentle, full of light. I do not know if she is alive. I do not know if she ever thought of me again. Maybe that is why I looked at you the way I did. Not because you are her, but because you helped me remember the kind of love I once had. I stopped breathing for a second. This wasn't about me being her daughter. This wasn't her claiming me. This wasn't a hidden family twist. This was something softer. Something sadder. Something more human. She had simply found a piece of comfort in me. A piece of memory. A piece of hope. I read the last line slowly, my hands trembling. If you find this letter, it means I have gone. Please do not be sad. You gave me more than you will ever understand. You gave me your presence. Your footsteps. Your routine. Your kindness. Your time. And all of these were gifts. The kind I never expected to receive again. May you live a life full of the love you shared with a stranger. May it return to you in ways you cannot yet imagine. The letter ended with no signature. No name. Just the faint scent of old paper and cold morning air. I folded it slowly, carefully, like holding something sacred. Then I placed it in my bag, close to my heart. Because now I knew. She hadn't left because she wanted to. She hadn't disappeared because she chose to. Her body had simply reached its limit. And her soul had found its way out of a life filled with quiet suffering. There was one more thing wrapped inside the scarf. A small key. Rusty. old. Attached to a tiny wooden tag with a number written on it. Something inside me whispered what it might be. A locker? A drawer? A box? I wasn't sure. But I knew she wanted me to find whatever it opened. So I followed the number. The tag belonged to a small storage locker at a public facility not far from the park. I walked there slowly, almost afraid of what I would find, almost afraid of what it would mean. When I reached the place, the clerk looked confused when I handed him the key. "That locker hasn't been opened in years," he said. My heart tightened. When he unlocked it and stepped aside, I stared at the contents quietly. Inside the locker were a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, a worn-out diary, a pair of tiny baby socks wrapped in tissue, a small food container with nothing inside, a folded cloth bag, and a little metal box. Nothing expensive, nothing shiny, nothing grand, just a life. A fragile, quiet, hidden life. I sat on a nearby chair and opened the metal box. Inside were coins. Hundreds of tiny coins. Old ones. New ones. Foreign ones. Local ones. Heavy ones. Light ones. And in the middle, a small note. "These are the coins people gave me over the years. But yours are the ones I kept closest." My hand flew to my mouth. Because I could see them. My coins, the ones I had dropped into her hand every morning, neatly placed in a little cloth pouch. She had kept them. Not spent them. Not traded them. Not used them for food. She had kept them as reminders of kindness. I closed my eyes. And for the first time, I cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone around me noticed. Just softly, the way pain leaves the body when it has been waiting too long. When I finally returned home, the world felt different. My home felt different. My steps felt different. My thoughts felt different. Even my reflection in the mirror looked different. Not older, not sadder, just awake. I placed a diary on my table and sat with it for a long time before opening it. Her handwriting was uneven, shaky in some places, steady in others. Some pages were full of stories. Others held single sentences. A few were blank. The diary wasn't a confession. It wasn't a dramatic life story. It wasn't a record of hardship meant to gain sympathy. It was simply her voice. Sometimes she wrote about the weather. Sometimes about memories. Sometimes about food she wished she could taste again. Sometimes about the people who passed her without seeing her. Sometimes about the ones who smiled. And somewhere near the end, she wrote, "If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know that I loved this world, even when it did not love me back." I closed the diary slowly. I knew then that my life would never be the same again. Not because I had met a stranger. Not because she had a sad past. Not because she left me a scarf, a letter, a key. But because she had touched something inside me that I didn't even know was asleep. The change in me didn't happen all at once. It was slow, soft, steady. I started walking slower in the mornings. I looked at people more. I noticed small things: the tired eyes of a cashier, the way an old man struggled to carry groceries, the silence in someone's voice when they said, "I'm fine." I became less impatient, less distracted, less wrapped in my own world. I started volunteering once a week. Sometimes at shelters. Sometimes at food drives. Sometimes just sitting with people who needed someone to listen. Not because I wanted to pay back anything, but because I finally understood. Kindness is not charity. It is connection. It is seeing people. Really seeing them. And Sophia, though that might not have been her real name, had taught me that without ever asking for anything in return. A few weeks later, I returned to the park. The tree was bare, its branches thin and reaching toward the sky like open hands. I sat on the bench and placed her scarf beside me. Not to leave it, but to remember. I whispered softly, almost afraid the wind would carry my words away too quickly. Thank you for letting me see you. A small part of me wished she could hear me. A larger part of me felt that she already had. I sat there for a long time, watching the sky. And for the first time in years, I felt completely present. No rushing. No worrying. No noise. Just gratitude. A simple, quiet gratitude for a woman I barely knew, but somehow knew deeply. A stranger who wasn't a stranger. A story I didn't expect to be part of. A lesson I didn't know I needed. And as I finally stood up to leave, I felt something warm in my chest. Not closure. Not certainty. Not a perfect ending. Just peace. A peace that whispered, "She left something in you. Carry it gently." It has been months now. Months since I last saw her. Months since I found the letter. Months since the morning that changed something quiet but permanent inside me. Life has gone on, just as it always does. The seasons have turned. The city has shifted. People come and go, rushing past each other, living entire lives in their heads while the world moves around them. But I walk a little differently now. Not faster. Not slower. Just more aware. Sometimes when I pass the street corner where she used to sit, I pause for a moment. I don't stand long. I don't say anything out loud. I just stop long enough to remember the soft, tired smile she gave me on the very last evening. It's strange how a person can be part of your routine without ever truly being part of your life. And then, quietly, become part of your heart forever. Sophia, if that was her real name, might never have known what she left with me. Or maybe she did. Maybe that's why she left the letter. Maybe that's why she saved the coins. Maybe that's why she held my hand and spoke those final words in a trembling voice. Her presence, her stories, her silence, all of it changed me in ways I didn't understand until much later. I didn't learn big lessons. Nothing dramatic. No sudden realizations that turned my world upside down. But I learned small truths. Tiny pieces of wisdom she carried inside her life the way she carried her folded scarf. I learned that everyone is carrying something. Even the ones who look invisible. Even the ones who ask for nothing. Even the ones we pass without seeing. I learned that kindness doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need speeches. Or grand gestures. Or promises. Sometimes kindness is a small coin in someone's hand. Sometimes it's a smile. Sometimes it's a moment of attention. Sometimes it's simply slowing down enough to notice someone else exists. I learned that stories live inside everyone. Even those who don't speak. Especially those who don't speak. And I learned something else too, something I didn't expect. I learned that I was lonely. Not the dramatic kind of loneliness. Not the kind that keeps you awake at night. Just the quiet kind. The kind that sits in the corners of life when everything feels too routine, too predictable, too silent. And in her own fragile way, she filled that silence. She didn't do it with big words or constant conversation. She did it simply by being there. And sometimes, that is enough. I didn't keep everything from her locker. Some items I donated. Some I gave to shelters. Some I placed in hands that needed them more than I ever could. But I kept 3 things. The scarf. The tiny cloth pouch with the coins. And her last letter. These are the things that remind me gently, softly, without pressure to stay human. To stay awake. To look up. To notice. To care. I keep the scarf folded in a drawer. Sometimes I take it out and run my fingers across the fabric. It's worn, fragile, almost threadbare in places. But it feels warm in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. The coin pouch sits on my desk. Not as decoration. Not as a symbol. Just as a reminder that someone once cherished the smallest things I gave without thinking. And the letter. I keep it in a book. A book I rarely open. A book that holds stories as soft as hers. Every now and then, on quiet nights when the world feels a little heavy, I unfold the paper and read her words again. Not to feel sad. Not to remember loss. But to remember that connection, even the smallest kind, is never wasted. People often talk about legacies like they're grand things. Buildings. Achievements. Awards. Names carved into stone. But her legacy wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. It wasn't something the world would ever notice. Her legacy was a moment of eye contact. A folded scarf. A trembling hand in mine. A letter written by someone who didn't owe me anything, but gave me something anyway. She taught me a truth I didn't expect to learn. We don't choose the people who change us. They appear quietly. And they leave quietly. But the space they open in our hearts never closes again. She didn't change my world. She didn't fix my problems. She didn't become a mother figure, and she didn't ask to be one. She simply reminded me that kindness matters. Even when no one sees it. Even when it feels too small to matter. Even when it feels like the world is too big to change. It still matters. Sometimes, when the morning is cold and the city feels heavy, I imagine her walking beside me. Not as a ghost. Not as a memory frozen in sadness. But as someone who once crossed my path and left warmth behind. I imagine her smiling softly, the way she did that night under the faint streetlight. I imagine her telling me another small story, the kind that held more truth than length. I imagine her resting for a moment, then saying, "Go on. Live your life with gentleness." And I do. I walk forward. Gently. Quietly. Softly. Carrying the lesson she left behind. You never know what a small act of kindness might mean to someone. Or how deeply it might change you. And that, maybe, is the closest thing to a beautiful ending this story will ever have.